we were talking last week that when you have those experiences worshiping with other groups or visiting other groups, you want to think about those 5 C's: the climate, the culture, the content, the consistency, or the commonality and compatibility. And so that's what you want to be able to best describe your, gee, that was a good sermon with, because that's going to better connect us to understanding what your experience really was, as opposed to what Christian visitors typically do, which is shake the preacher's hand and go, that was really good. Because sometimes it's not really good. But we'll talk about that during the course of today. So our scripture reads, and I'm reading from the NIV, "Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a workman who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth. Avoid godless chatter, because those who indulge in it will become more and more ungodly. Flee the evil desires of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments, because you know that they produce quarrels. And the Lord's servant must not quarrel. Instead, he must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. Those who oppose him, he must gently instruct, in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth, and that they will come to their senses and escape from the trap of the devil, who has taken them captive to do his will." So, that's a lot of verses, and we're really comfortable often with 2 Timothy 2:15, 2:16. The 22 and 26 really lend themselves in some way to understanding those 5 C's, and then understanding how to conduct ourselves as well when we're interacting with people, when the sermon maybe was not so good, or when we discover that there's information that's not really consistent, not only with the Bible, but with what their website says. So let me just give you a brief example of what I mean by not consistent before we take a look at the questions that are part of your assignment for this week. The church that we had occupying our other building that was worshiping with us, we had encouraged them on several occasions to join forces so that we would be a more united group to be able to do kingdom business together. And in the conversations that we had, we seemed to be having impediments. There seemed to be pushbacks, because when we talked about joining forces, once we got to the point about serving together, working together, making kind of one out of 2 groups, they would want to pose questions that would put on display their understanding of God's sovereignty. So things like, if God is unchanging, did God die on the cross? Is God sovereign over everything? Does free will truly exist? Those kind of things. And so we encountered those often enough that what your leadership team did is we asked the church for their constitution and bylaws. We asked them for what governs them in writing. And when we reviewed it, the funny thing is it read pretty close to our Constitution, our defining principles that guide our operation and our practices. And when we went back to the group to say, guys, there seems to be more that we have in common than things that separate us, their response to us was, yes, but. And so appreciate Steve's look there. And so the yes, but typically means this. We've got something in writing, but we really don't do that. And so when you visit, when you worship with other groups, instead of just getting from the sermon that was really good, you need to understand if their message matches what their principles are supposed to be, that you either have in writing or through a discussion or interaction with the leadership, because frequently people don't always practice what they say. So let me just leave a little bit of room there. I've got some people nodding heads. Any commentary there? And that's part of the reason that I asked us when the assignment was go on and visit other churches is the first thing that you need to do is, if you're not going to their website and understanding what it is that they espouse, understanding what it is that they say they do, talk, meet with the leadership, because that's very important. And it's important because a lot of times, as we said before, churches say that they do a certain thing, but once you actually become a part of the practice, you discover that things are not quite what they seem. And that's always one of the things that I've appreciated about our group of worshipers, is that we operate according to a lot of the conservative aspects of our Constitution and our tenets, but I've not gotten pushback from any of us when people say, well, what denomination are you? And I say, we're Jesusists. And I appreciate even some of the looks that you guys have right now, because Jesusists almost says something a little bit more impactful than we're Baptist, we're Methodist, we're Wesleyan, we're Presbyterian, etc. Because there's going to be a question next, because there's not a denomination that says, what's a Jesusist? That says, what do you mean by that? And then we have an opportunity to engage, especially as leadership or as participants, to say, this is what we mean by being Jesusists. What's that, Steve? Okay. So let's go ahead and tackle our questions, and then I'm going to open up the floor to certainly to Steve and to Sarah and to Jerry and to Sherry and perhaps Ellen, to talk about your worship experiences and try to base those on those 5 C's, if you would. Okay. So first question says, why would we visit / attend other worship group services? So that's a question to you. Why would we do that? Especially if we have our own worship group and our own church. Why would we do that?
Okay, so Preston, I wrote down 3 things, right? And these are probably these were just things that kind of came out, right? So first off, you visit other worship groups services because maybe you're looking for a new place to attend, right? Or for a place to attend in the first place. Sometimes people are looking because they want to find a new place to go, whether it's based on feelings or teachings, and then just see what others do. Those are the 3 things that I had.
Okay. That's certainly a good list. Other folks?
My experiences with going out and visiting the 2 places was vastly different between the 2. The first one I went to, they were full blown.
And Jer, before you talk about the specifics of your visit, the question right now is kind of why would we visit or why would we attend other services? So not necessarily the differences between those services yet, but what's the reason why we would do that in the first place? That's not necessarily, the assignment that we had is not necessarily one that other churches practice, other churches participate in. In fact, it's almost one that should have some people shaking their head as to why would we do that? And that's where this question is. What's the point?
I think for me, and for the assignment and everything, it was really strange to do that because I'm so used to being with the group that I'm with. But I guess as we're branching forward and all, it's good to go out and see how other people do church. So we kind of know what people are used to, what they expect, what they're comfortable with. And as we're working on how we're approaching everything, to find ways that either we can incorporate or to see things that we know that's certainly not the direction that we want to engage in. So I guess for me, it's just sort of, I think about it. I've been going, except for visits when I go home to visit parents, I've been going to the same church for 30 years.
Right.
And it has changed over time, but also so has a lot of other churches. So I guess it's just a good experience to see how, whether it's the same denomination or different denominations or non-denominations, how church is being done in other places, to see what others are used to having access to. I don't know.
Yeah, you know, a funny thing about church people is sometimes all they know is all they know.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean by that? Is if you do things a certain way, most or all of the time, that's all it is that you know. And so you don't know anything other than that. And I'm going to use a word to describe that, and I'm not using that for any individuals, but it's the word that describes if all you know is all you know. And that word is ignorance. And what that simply means is by not being exposed to other stuff, a lot of times the phrase that you use is this one: I did the best I knew how. And I did the best I know how is similar to that phrase I told you, that was a good sermon. Because I did the best I know how is not the best answer. The best answer is I did the best there was. Do you understand the difference between the two? Because if all you know is all you know, which means if your parents raised you drinking prune juice every night, and that's what you think is okay, I've seen some good faces there, and that's what you think is a good closing night celebration, and you decide you get older and you want to either marry or date someone and you want to invite their parents over and you want to close the night with a prune juice cocktail toast, okay, looking at Steve's face suggests not necessarily a good thing. But if all you know is all you know, then that's all you know to do. And so your answer is, I did the best that I knew how, but that's not the best there is when there are several other drinks besides the prune cocktail for us to be able to close a night with. And unfortunately, church people are like that about their faith. Now, you're not like that about work. When you go to work, you recognize in a very short period of time if you're in a niche or if there's more things that you need to be exposed to better do your job. And a lot of times you're motivated to do your job better by learning more than what it is you've perhaps been exposed to. But we're not like that in our churches. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, so this is just my opinion. I think sometimes, and I know my opinion is just my opinion, is that sometimes people don't want to stretch out to see what other groups are doing, because sometimes it could show the inadequacies in ourselves. And so we get used to doing things a certain way, right?
Yep.
And we don't necessarily like to do things differently. But you know, who moved my cheese is what comes into my brain, because we do tend to get into a routine. And if we go and visit other places, sometimes instead of looking at it as a way to learn and grow, we look at it as a failing. And that's not the way we should be doing it.
Correct. I think that's a brilliant observation, Sarah. We've only met him once, but I will tell you, I always enjoy hearing about Steve's brother, Mark. And since we were first exposed to Mark and then getting an opportunity to hear some of what Steve has to say about Mark, I've learned a lot about what we should and how we could do things based on some of the things I've learned about and from Mark, who is a pastor of a church in a place that is kind of podunk United States. But it's a happening organization because he has rallied and gathered people for the purpose of Jesusing in a way that is quite different than a lot of churches. And it's very exciting. Now, let me tell you another one that will make more closer sense to home for you. I regularly rant and rave about Ed Hoagland. I regularly threaten to do him bodily harm. Now, for those of you who know me, you recognize I want to do him bodily harm because the reports of what he's doing with his Jesus-oriented group is world-changing almost every week. And so I enjoy being able to get angered or to get riled up by looking at what Ed and his team is affecting and is affecting and comparing it and going, we need to be more that way. We need to do more of that. I can also tell you, for those of us that had the pleasure of going on a very different kind of mission trip to hang out with Ed, it was world-changing in terms of understanding you got to see how other people do it. And you got to understand sometimes how the 5 C's play in, and that just because you go there, it's not a good sermon. And there are a lot of churches that are busy, but they're not being busy about kingdom business. They're busy being a really good church. And being a really good church sometimes in our 21st century mindset is a really good country club for folks to network with people that they think that are the right hobnob kind of people. So taking a look at that first question, let me give you some suggestions, and probably Sarah will put them up on the magic board. Why would we attend other worship group services? To partner with other believers, which doesn't happen well in the 20th or 21st centuries. That's why there's churches on every doggone corner instead of one church maybe on a corner with all believers working for the main reason that we're working, or we should be, to better understand their and our needs. And we're going to try to do this. This is for sending help, and this is for joining and providing help. To learn from our respective strengths. There are going to be some places kind of like Steve's brother Mark's church, where they've got a lot of service stuff oriented. They've got a lot of ability to go out and influence and affect the neighborhoods where they're set up, and in terms, because they have numbers. They can start new worship gangs because they have numbers. And those are things sometimes that can get us very positively charged to say, okay, it makes sense that we've got really good 20-25 strong, but we need to be a good 125 strong. And that would help us to consider that we need workers to go help with the harvest. To better practice the kingdom right here and right now. I can't tell you how frustrated I get watching and listening to Christians wait for heaven before they have like a mind and a heart and an attitude change. They're all waiting to get to heaven until they get these glorified bodies. Then they're going to celebrate and party and worship Jesus way better than we do now. Why don't we get it together now and start worshiping the right way, so that instead of missing sports and missing all of these things that are wonderful attractions that we typically have, we should be getting excited about Jesus right now, especially in the absence of all the other diversions that aren't here right now. To increase our ability to influence the community. Well, if we were better supercharged, sometimes by going and visiting other churches, we can see what they are or aren't doing, or how effective or how ineffective they are. And that might help us to go, guys, we need to ramp up our community organization, our community integration, because other churches aren't doing that. And right now, what our world needs is an injection of Jesus, because the chaos and the anarchy are not going away anytime soon. And people are continuing to get more and more angry. And so sometimes by visiting other churches, it can help go, guys, we can't just be sitting around in our club. We need to go and do. And we need to encourage maybe even this group to go and do, either by our interaction with them or by modeling that this is what we should be doing. And then the last one in this column is to increase our own confidence and excitement. The mission trip we went on with Ed has stayed with me for almost, it feels like almost 10 years. And sometimes what happens is when you do a mission trip, it's really cool when you come back, because right now, when you come back off the mission trip, you're going to change the world, and you have a whole lot of stuff that are neat memories from the mission trip. And then about 8 weeks later, all of that dissipates. Sometimes by going and hanging out with Bruce's gang in Kona, you come back going, I really like that they are able to meet outside and that they're not limited by a building in the way that other churches are, and we can meet wherever it takes us to meet. And that kind of thing can supercharge you where you go, we are not obligated by our building or what our experiences are in order to shape and change the community. Open for you guys for commentary with that first question. Okay. Question 2. What are important things to know / understand?
Wait a second, Preston. Preston, I think Gene was going to say something.
We can't see Gene.
Oh, I can see Gene.
Oh, okay. Maybe he's on another page. Okay.
Gene, did you want to say something?
Well, it was more so I couldn't hear Preston when he came back. Excuse me. I did have a thought regarding buildings and doing things differently. I went on a mission trip more than 35 years ago, which was your painting thing. And we met where the music was supplied by an accordion, and we commented on this in our meeting with the financial people. We basically met in the equivalent of a pavilion. There were no walls to this church. It was a floor, some posts holding a roof up, and then a roof. And that's where we held church. And the man who was leading the service was pastoring 9 different congregations in the region of Guatemala where he was. We have a completely different understanding of what church is, and particularly when we talk about missionaries who are going to a different land, and after a few weeks are going, okay, you're going to be a pastor in a church, you're going to be a pastor of church, you're going to be a pastor of church, and our mentality is, no, you can't send them to pastor of church, they've got to be trained and all this kind of thing. But when you've got congregations that are growing quickly, sometimes you get people put into a fray that they were not necessarily prepared for, and I think that's what they had happening in the first century.
Sure. And you know what? That's something else that I got from Steve's brother Mark, is that when they would go on mission trips, one of the things that they would do is there would be people who would become believers. And then obviously Mark can't stay in that particular location for the rest of his life, mentoring those folks. And so he and his team would find the folks who were the most mature out of those new believers, and those folks would then become elders. And that's quite backwards from the American way of doing church. The American way of doing church is you go to seminary for 12 years, and then you work as an understudy to the pastor for about 15 years. And then when the pastor is about to pass into the grave, he's going to fall into the grave, then he anoints Brother Bruce to take over the ministry that's been this guy's for 48 years. And there's minimal excitement sometimes in that, because everybody liked the guy falling into the grave, and then when the new guy comes in, pretty much everybody's looking for a new place to go. So we don't take advantage sometimes of the good momentum and the excitement that we should have as Jesus's people, reflecting kind of what Gene's talking about, is because we have a country club way of doing it, and that's unfortunately how we like it. So thanks, Gene. So question 2 says, so what are important things to know / understand before visiting or attending others' services? What are important things to know and understand? That's a question to you.
Well, you kind of need to know what they believe.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. You want to have an idea of what to expect doctrinally, so that you're not broadsided by, oh, you believe you have to be baptized in order to be saved? Oh, you believe that you're not saved unless you speak in tongues? You need to actually understand some of that before we get there.
Other folks, other responses?
Another thing a doctrinal thing that it's for some folks not really a doctrinal thing, but it really ought to be, is understand before you go that you might be listening to Pastor Barbara or Pastor Josephine, and understand that these folks may have a different attitude toward what qualifies somebody to be a pastor.
Correct.
But I was also very interested to see what their mission statement was.
Yep.
What they were trying to do with their beliefs and as impacting the community and everything. So that's something that I tried to look ahead at. The first one was online.
Other thoughts?
I spent a lot of years traveling on the road for business, and I wasted a lot of Wednesday nights going and trying to find some fellowship and stuff, and not really going outside the Baptist doctrine, so trying to stay within the Baptist church. And what a lot of churches do on Wednesday nights? Business meetings. Business meetings as well. I walked into a lot of those situations where, even within my own supposedly group of people, there was nothing welcoming about it or anything. So you got to understand that they're going to look at you like you're crazy, and you're going to look at them like they're crazy a lot of times.
I can tell you that talking with the leadership is something that has happened quite comfortably. It evolved quite comfortably for Ellen and I over the years, because moving from the north from New England to the south, and given the peculiarity of our situation, that was a lot more peculiar in the days when we moved down here, we didn't know what to expect. And so one of the first things that I would do is I would call and I would try to meet with, if I couldn't speak with, the leadership of the church. And I can tell you that I've probably interviewed not just Baptist churches, but and less the non-denominational ones sometimes, because they're a little bit off kilter in terms of what it is and how they practice. But even the Catholic churches, the Lutheran churches, the Episcopalian churches, the Presbyterian, the Methodists, we probably spoke with or tried to meet with most of those folks. And even meeting with the leadership, one of the funny things that occurred for a lot of our early days, and this actually happens sometimes even when we go to Carolina, is a little less so now. But we would go and we'd visit the church service after a pretty good exchange or meeting with the leadership, and the whole church service would be spent looking at Ellen and me. So even the practices of the congregation were different than what it is that the leadership had explained. Is that folks had a certain culture or a certain cultural practice that was different from what it is that they said that they were supposed to be about. And so certainly Ellen and I may have attended some of those churches a couple of times to see if maybe we were, there was something awry about that visit. And then we no longer went back to some of those churches if the whole time was spent looking at Ellen and me. And again, that was about 50 years ago, back when, we weren't the Lovings, but I think we were the fourth couple after the Lovings here in Virginia. So it was an anomaly. But that's one of the things that we do. In fact, Ellen kind of laughs at me because I'll call up the church leadership and we'll be on the phone, if not for 30 minutes, an hour or so, saying, what do you guys do? Where's your stuff? Let's see what you're all about. Because the experience that Jerry described is one that happens a lot, even in Baptist circles, where you show up thinking that you're about to, because Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, is usually prayer meeting, right? Well, what prayer meeting winds up being is not a time of worship, it's a time of gossip. And if you're a visitor, it's a time of gossip that you don't care about, which is also sometimes what a lot of Sunday school is. The first 15 to 20 minutes of Sunday school is let's pray for people I don't care about or I don't know about. And so when we take a look at this question, here's some of the answers on the magic screen. It's important to know and understand these things before visiting and attending. It's important to know who they worship and why. Now, this is not just a question that's difficult for church people, difficult for churches sometimes to nail, but church people don't know how to answer this question. Who they worship and why. How they worship is important. And we're not just talking about necessarily the clothing, and because some of that stuff you can walk into and feel like, oh, Ellen and I had that kind of fun experience when we were leaving Carolina just a couple weeks back, because we were the only people with shorts, I think, on, and Ellen, maybe she'll talk about that later. What they believe is important. What they believe. Because you go to a church and it says Baptist, or you go to a church and it says, Church of Christ or Church of God, but what they believe in many ways is very different from what you believe. And then lastly here, what the leadership says, practices, and does. Folks, can you still hear me? Okay. What the leadership says, practices, and does. And that's why sometimes you want to talk to the leadership. And here's probably a good experience. That's a weird one that I can explain to you. And I'm going to leave the floor open for you after this. We've gone to churches where the leadership has said, this is how we operate. And we've gone to the church and the experience has been less so. And then the leadership will either call or contact me and apologize and say, I'm sorry, we didn't do a very good job of putting our practice of belief with what it didn't match with what we talked about. And that's important to know sometimes, because that almost tells you that leader has a sense of humility that he recognizes that there's some growth that they have to go through. And surprisingly, there are a lot of leaders who apologize for where their congregation is, in part because the congregation pays their salaries. So sometimes they can't change a situation that they get into, because sometimes churches get to be about butts and bucks, especially sometimes some of the church plants, some of the new seeker-friendly churches that start out kind of in schools or in auditoriums someplace, is the church goes in a different direction, but it has to kind of stay in that direction because the leadership is afraid to change it more toward a Jesus worship because people want a different environment. So I just said a whole lot there. Floor is open.
Preston, can you hear
comments,
me?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Matt. I can hear you.
I'm sorry. Can y'all see me too?
Yes, Matt, we can. Well, I can see you, and I'm a little bit concerned, but I'm not going to go that route. So
I've got an autopilot. What Preston just said is so powerful, because there's so many ends of that spectrum, and one is what Preston just said, calling ahead. The other is kind of, there's this term called secret shopper, right? Where you just kind of show up. And I love doing that, because what they don't realize is you have a deep background in church. Like Jerry was saying, you show up on Wednesday nights, you have expectations of some things, and it's completely different. Well, if you show up unannounced and almost looking like you're aloof, they don't know who you are. And that is when you can really observe what really is taking place week to week, because they don't have a clue who you are. And that's when you can learn a lot too. You come almost walk in like you're lost, both spiritually and like, hey, just kind of looking around. And you learn a ton that way. And then later you follow up and say, hey, by the way, I came to the church. And they're like, oh. And that's a really good way to get a kind of an experience. I'll tell you something else that's powerful too. Preston, what you just said about church plants, is there's a lot of depth to what you just said on that. And the reason that resonated with me was, when you plant a church out west in Las Vegas and some of your partners are from
Yeah.
expectations. I appreciate your support. That's not going to work out here. And well, here's how we do it in Tennessee. Well, I get that, but we're not in Tennessee. And, so you're welcome to fly out here and implement that if you'd like to, but it's not going to work here. And the point is, I'd rather walk away from your dollars and reach souls than to keep your money and change my format. And that's bold too, because it's scary.
Right.
Because it takes resources. does hate.
Okay, I didn't know Matt spoke Klingon. That's pretty amazing. Matt, you don't know it, but you cut out so much it really sounded like some other foreign language. But yeah, I want to share a couple things about, number one, a couple of visits that I've had way in the past, and number two, asking the right questions. And I'll start with the second first. I had a couple at Faith, Bud and Rose, and they want to get married. And at the time, our pastor was interim pastor Carl Deemer. He was coming in from Lynchburg every week, and I said, "Oh, sure. Let me check with Dr. Deemer and see if he would marry you guys." And Rose was black and Bud was white, or he called himself high yellow. I'm not sure how real that was. Anyway, I said, Bud and Rose would like to get married, but she's black and he's white, and is that an issue? No, that's not an issue at all for him. So he comes to church that Sunday, and we're all ready to get Bud and Rose hitched up. Come to find out, no, he can't marry them because they've both been divorced. And he won't marry people who have divorced in the history. I didn't know that. I didn't ask the right question. I thought the issue was going to be the interracial thing, not so much the divorce thing. So asking the right questions is the key. I went to a Wednesday night church service one time when I was working up in Pennsylvania, and I did one of the things that Matt tried to express in Klingon, where you kind of go in seeker, undercover kind of thing. You walk in and just kind of see if someone directs you, kind of, whatever. And I ended up kind of wandering the building a little bit, and I walked into choir practice. I sat down in choir practice. I listened to choir practice. I went to the service. I walked out, and not one soul spoke to me. Not a soul, not even, what are you doing in choir practice? None of that. And so we need to be a little bit wise when it comes to folks coming in and trying to direct them, trying to engage with them. That was one of the things that really caught my attention. It's like, okay, wait a minute. I've gone through this entire time and not spoken to a single person here. What's up with that? So those are a couple of experiences that I've had when it comes to asking the right questions and what things ought to be like. One last one real quickly. We were in Florida. We were in, for the first time in my life that I can recall, church shopping mode. I mean, I had never done this before. I basically went from my childhood church to Faith, and then moved from Faith to Thomas Road when I went to college, and then came back, and then it was going to Florida. So I was actually shopping for a church for the first time, and one church I went to, the pastor announced, okay, tonight we're going to talk about Calvinism and Arminianism. Well, that kind of got my radar going. And so I said, okay, let me come back tonight and find out about that. And the guy presents his presentation there, his lesson, and by the time it's all done, and I don't mean to get too point ahead here, but he had, when it comes to the perseverance of the saints, as far as the Calvinists understand, he had the Arminians saying the same thing. And it was like, well, wait a minute. That's a distinct difference between the Calvinists and the Arminians, because the Calvinists say, once saved, always saved. Right. But the Arminians say you can lose your salvation depending on how you're standing with God. And I confronted the pastor after that and tried to see if I could reason through and help him to see his error, but he was not teachable.
Right. Yep.
And so it was one of those things where, no, I said what I said, I'm going to stick by that. This was one of those monolithic sort of pastor sorts of things, and I didn't go back, because if I've got a pastor there that isn't interested in maybe seeing where he went awry in his teaching, or I mean, opposite example. Went to visit my mom's church, and the pastor used a couple of different references in his message, and the reference that he used didn't match what he thought it was saying. So I pointed that out to him afterwards, and he said, "This is a different attitude." He says, "Oh, I got that wrong. I got to check on that." So sometimes it's a matter of how humble that leader is, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
Other comments?
So I'll say one thing, and just one of the churches that we visited, okay, and talking about, how they worship, right? So one that we looked at when trying to figure out exactly what they did, they had 4 services, okay? And the services, 2 of them were about the same, right? So like 2 traditional, 1 contemporary, and 1 modern. And Steve and I were going, well, what in the world is the difference between contemporary and modern? I understand traditional, that I get, but what's the difference between contemporary and modern? And just trying to look at, it took me a little while to find on their website exactly what it was. And their modern one, they use effects, okay? So they use like lights and fog machines. Yeah. I don't know about the feathers falling from the ceiling. We're not going to go that far because we didn't go there. But it's kind of like, well, then you try to figure out, well, why in the world do you have 4 different services? Why? So that was just interesting to see kind of their descriptions as to what they did, and they didn't really tell you exactly why they did the 4 services. And then you think, well, if you've got 4 services, then are you that big that maybe you need to send some folks out? So I don't know, Steve, if you want to say anything else about that, but it was just interesting to see that, and the fact that the modern was contemporary on steroids is the way that I would probably look at it, right? Again, don't use feathers from the ceiling or anything, but they did mention fog machines in their description.
So Steve has nothing to add about that.
I mean, the only thing I would say is the reason. I mean, this is my opinion. We didn't hear from the leadership or anything like that, but the reason that you have different services is because you're casting your net as wide as you can to essentially try to appeal to everyone. But correct. To me, underlining that is that if the gospel isn't enough, you have other issues.
Right. Correct. Brilliantly said. And that's kind of what is neat sometimes about us having this group of people and having Gene and Bruce and Matt, because the gospel's got to be the main drag. The main thing is the main thing. And I'll briefly say this before we move on to our next question. Ellen and I went to a church, you've heard me say this before, and we laugh about this so regularly. We don't know why the church is still in business with the guy as pastor. We went on a Resurrection Sunday, and we went early so that we could they were advertising breakfast. So we went early to have breakfast to be able to congregate with folks, see how well that would go before the main service, because that was what was replacing Sunday school that morning. And so when we went into breakfast, the only person really that addressed us was the pastor, who knew that we were new because obviously we looked like different people. And he walked up to us, and the first thing he said was, after, "Hi, how you doing? And are you enjoying your breakfast?" was, "I'm sorry, I've got to preach on the resurrection today, and it's really difficult for me to make it exciting, preach about it all the time. I'm sorry that you're here for this." And the very fact that on the one day, in many ways, that gives him a job, he walks up to visitors and tells us he's sorry because he can't make the day more exciting, reflects back to me what it is that Sarah's talking about. Now, this is a church that was in many ways becoming a mega church. They were building new outbuildings. The community was coming to this church. But I can tell you, we've never been there again, in part because of the exchange we had with the leader, who basically said, on the day that gives me a job, I don't know how to make this exciting to people.
the fact that you have to apologize for God's message is a problem. I'm just saying. Just saying.
It seems to me like that fellow has actually gotten over. Hear me carefully. He's gotten over the fact that the Son of God came down here, was crucified, and then got up out of that grave. He's gotten over that.
Correct.
That's something that's apparently he's all okay with that, and evidently it's commonplace. I'm sorry. There's something really different about that. I agree with you guys. I wouldn't go back.
Now, it didn't stop the church's growth. They were still building and still drawing people because people want church. But you can see if the leader's already saying, I'm sorry that I'm going to bore you with today's message, I can't be a part of that, even if the church is doing all the things that the community thinks the church should look like. And that's why it's important that we know what we're walking into when we walk into these places. Just because they have all the trappings of what a good church should be doesn't mean that they're doing the work of the kingdom.
Hey, Preston, that's key, because I finally have come to realize one of the reasons that we've had folks come in and visit and seem to enjoy and that sort of thing and then never come back is because it wasn't what they were expecting. It wasn't what they were used to. It was not, in their minds, what church was supposed to be. And so they didn't feel like they were able to check that box or whatever because they hadn't gone to something that was ritualistic or funereal, like you like to use. They didn't go to something that felt like a sacrifice. They actually maybe enjoyed themselves, and it didn't seem like they had done something that they were supposed to have done. So this is why when I began to say it's not your grandma's church. We're not grandma's church because we're not in pews. We don't have a choir and an organ. We don't have some of those trappings that folks expect to be associated with church. And maybe some folks just don't expect to actually enjoy church. I don't know.
So question 3 might be a quick one, and it says, how do we discover what other worship groups are about? And I'll just help you with the magic screen there. To phone and speak with the leadership. Visit the leadership before a service and have a conversation. I can tell you, in moving down here to Virginia, we if not we did that, I did that a lot. To meet with the pastor, to say, look, we believe in Jesus. What are you guys doing? What are you about? Are you folks going to have? Are you going to freak out that we're a couple that are from different ethnicities? You're going to freak out about that, so that we at least had an understanding of what we thought we were walking into. Now, I also appreciate what Matt said before too, because fortunately, perhaps with my way of speaking, if I just have a phone call with folks, they don't necessarily know, unless I've told them we're of mixed ethnicity, that we're the folks you just talked to on the phone. So we also had that fun, too, of having the discussions with folks on the phone and then showing up and then folks not knowing, oh, you're the guy that I was talking to for an hour on the phone. Right. Thoroughly review the website to understand how they advertise. Because sometimes people are saying certain things, and that's not what it is that they're doing. Or vice versa.
And you can gain a lot from their website if they've done it correctly.
Yeah.
Right? If they've laid it out and they've done certain things and you can find it. And sometimes the website is almost what sells the church to people.
Correct. In this day and age.
In this day and age, yes.
Yeah. And that's important too, especially because when you heard Gene mention this before, you want to go to the website today because you'll see pictures and you'll see descriptions. You want to take a look at like the About Us or the leadership. And you'll find there, if you're going to have an aversion to female pastors, to female preachers, to female ministers, you'll typically see it in that roster. And then you'll have to gauge if you believe that is based on scriptural principle. And if you're going to be comfortable in that environment where those folks are elevated to those particular positions. You'll also see the funny thing that makes me giggle, where you'll see the new title of First Lady. You need to be okay if you're okay going into that environment, where you see that person on display elevated to that position.
I did a little research on the church that I visited.
Yeah.
Are we mentioning names? I don't know.
No, but
Yeah.
I know. I took a look at the church you went to after
Right.
you took a look, after you mentioned it.
But so I didn't get to see a good sermon. They had a guest speaker that day, but I did enjoy reading their website. It was short and to the point, which I liked, so you could get a lot of information. But whether or not they live up to these tenets, I don't know. I like their verse, which was 1 Thessalonians 2:8. We loved you so much that we shared with you not only God's good news, but our own lives too.
Yep.
And then they had their values: give irrationally, time, talents, resources, show up, have fun, stay curious, create a safe place. To me, this was more of a starter church, just based on the little bit I heard through the service. But I did like the way that they had their website laid out. It was easy.
Yeah, and we've got a website guru hanging out with us today who's going to put us in position where we've got the hippest website there is. And if it's not, you can blame the guy who's going to be doing that, and he's in Secret Square, number that one. Di, I can tell you, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think the website can be jam-packed with deliciousness and understanding too. I can tell you that the word you mentioned that I saw on their website, that's the one that made me at least a little bit apprehensive. And when I see these two words, when they're based on Christian principles, they frighten me. Here's first one: reckless. And then the second one is this word: irrational. And here's why. I understand when they're talking about giving irrationally, and that's irrationally in regard to what the world thinks you should be doing for the church. But the Bible already says to give, and if I'm going to get the Greek right, help me, Gene, give hilariously. And hilariously is a much different rationale and significance than irrationally.
Right. But at least
means above. Oh, go ahead, Di.
I said at least they had set the expectation that you're not just coming here to sit on a pew.
Yep.
That's the one thing I gathered out of it is they're showing people there's an expectation here that you're going to be using your gifts, whatever they may be. And it may not be just what you want to do. It's going to be above and beyond what your normal inclination is to do.
Yeah, and I don't think you're wrong about that. I think that those words appeal to a different generation.
Yes.
They like that word or those words in their songs. They like that word kind of in their discussion. And the funny thing about the Bible is it has way better words, even when we translate them into English, instead of going with, because when you start thinking about reckless and irrational, and where those words normally go in the English language, what we apply those to, is usually not positive. But the way words have kind of been used today, we use words incorrectly, and that works for this generation. Like things are epic, things are awesome, things are, you're a Karen, stuff like that. So for me, I dug it and I recognized it, and I certainly appreciate that you had that experience. The exchange Diane and I are having is because it's important to me to take a look at that sort of stuff. And so I can tell you, I would like to think that Brother Gene, Brother Bruce, Matt and myself, if you guys say, hey, there's this church doing X and so, it's our job as the leadership to go take a look and to see if that is a site, if that is an information base that you should be using for the positive influence of the kingdom. That's a shepherding kind of thing that the spiritual leadership is supposed to do.
Well, that's why I thought they were really targeting a younger audience.
Demographic. Yep.
Because younger people want to make a difference more so than I've ever seen, even to the point where they only want to do 8 hours at work because they want to make a difference in their life or something. I don't know. But I could see how this would be very attractive to them.
Yep.
That term in there is safe place too. That's very young oriented. That's a trigger for them.
So
Yeah.
it's all interesting, but without seeing a sermon, I really don't know how they live out these values.
Correct. And so, it's important to piece those things together. And that's why you want to walk out of an experience with those 4 C's, because the website might be great, but if the leadership and the message and their practical kingdom application don't mix, then it doesn't matter that the sermon sounded good. If it's not changing, influencing, affecting lives, that people aren't having a transformation experience when they're in the presence of that, and then they come out changed to say, I need to be better kingdom-minded. Because that's really what our purpose, when we do this, that's our purpose, is when we leave, that we go, I need to be better about the kingdom during the course of my week.
Yeah. Preston, can you guys hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. I'll try to
I'm much happier to see you sitting in a stationary place. I'm just going to say that.
I'm going to try to move away from Klingon and go back to my normal Spanish. So let me just say 2 quick things that I thought about when you guys were sharing that. I love, Diane, what you just shared. And I'm so glad Bruce is a part of the mix from a ocular, I guess, perspective online, because it used to be that when people would pull up, they would say, they make their decision on whether or not they're coming back to your church in 7 seconds or whatever. That's gone by the wayside, because the first engagement with your church now is the website. I'm going to listen to a message. I'm going to see how I feel about what I see. Not that them showing up is less important, because you still got to create that atmosphere where people feel loved. So, but I think the website is so key for that. To that point about those terms, safe place, irrational, it's interesting in that regard, because you really want your website to be something that lowers barriers, not creates them. And when you use those very, not strategic, because I like strategic, but when you use those very faddish words that are generationally connected, I'm okay with that. But what you do is you almost create a feel immediately that we are really geared on this group and nobody else. And and you just kind of, and here's the thing, I tend to be more flamboyant with my words, so I have to be careful with that, because you can lop out a lot of people. I mean, like, you could be like, let's go crazy, we're going to run the world, we're going to change the world, let's go global. People are like, I just want to know if you got a place that my kid can come and learn about Jesus, So there's got to be those core values that come across in that. And because there's nothing wrong with reaching the millennials or Zs, but we have generation. Well, if we're going to be generationally minded, we've got to be very careful with what that looks like. And really, the website has to lower barriers and say, you're welcome. And one more thought. I love what you guys are saying about the fact that here's what we say we are. Are we really that when you show up? Because, it's really cool to throw that out when you build your website or when a church begins with these values in place, and then through the years they morph. And so what they look like online and what they actually are when you show up are two different. It's like when you look at pictures of a house or a car online, you're like, man, and then you go look at it, you're like, wait a minute, that looks completely different. So anyway, that's why I'm excited about the excitement here, because it's palpable, and we'll get that communicated on the website, but I know it'll follow through when we get together. So these are great thoughts.
Can I say one thing, Preston? You know me, I got to put it out there, because, when you talk about how do you discover what other worship groups are about, right? In this day and age, and Bruce, you're going to be on the spot with this, in this day and age, because of the fact that people either A, can't get together, or B, aren't comfortable yet getting together, right? Right. The website is typically going to be the first thing they're going to see about us, right? And then if they have something they can view, whether it be a sermon, whether it be a recording of a WebEx session, right, to see kind of what we're all about. This is just because of the way things are changing and the way things are available now, you almost can't discover almost in person. And if you do go in person, it may not be exactly what they're like in reality, because, the climate, right, trying to actually talk to somebody, now it's almost challenging. I mean, when we went to visit a church, we did talk to the pastor afterwards. The only other person who said something to us was somebody that we know. Okay. Nobody else really came over to say anything to us. And the pastor kind of saw us. We were waiting for Daniel. He was talking to the friends of his that go there. But it's a very different in-person experience now than it was a year ago. And so that website, and again, I'm looking at Bruce in my upper left-hand corner of my grid over here, you know, that's just what people are going to see now. And that's all we're going to be able to get people in. And I think those trigger words, Matt, that you were talking about, and Diane, yeah, we don't want to do triggers because, again, they do tend to alienate people, those trigger words.
Yeah, no pressure, Bruce.
You know, you guys are talking about, and I'll just make this brief analogy, but I think you'll get it because you guys have taken us here. You guys are talking about online dating, right?
Pretty much. Yeah, because now it's like, how do you date somebody or some organization? How do you go out and check it out and get to know them? You know,
Right.
so, but yeah, online dating.
Yeah, and so how we do that is I post a picture of me from 25 years ago when I was felt, and in Bruce's words, when I looked like El DeBarge, and I put down a whole bunch. I put down a whole bunch of superlatives about me, and some lady shows up, and boy is she disappointed because it looks like I may have eaten El DeBarge. So that's kind of what happened with online dating, and that's why we're talking about this, because this is the new reality that we're waking up to with church post COVID-19, and a lot of folks are not going to go back to something other than this.
I see, Bruce, there's a new business you can start. A dating app for churches.
Oh, we already have that. It's with the guy who used to be the Presbyterian pastor. It's eHarmony.
Oh, no. It's not for dating each other. It's for finding the church you want to go to online, virtually, whatever.
Gotcha. Okay.
The app's going to come about that says find your perfect church match.
Exactly.
Yep. Answer all these questions, but you got to be honest about it, and that's what people are not going to be honest about it.
Yep.
Right.
Just like online.
But you know what? You know what you need to, if we take this thing to its ultimate conclusion, though, let's understand that a lot of folks who are looking for a church aren't really looking for the same level of commitment that they are for dating. Because, I mean, let's face it, we've seen people come and go who did not have the commitment that, you know, joining a church is like a marriage. And it needs to be a serious matter, and serious enough that you're going to be thinking many, many times before you say, okay, see you later.
Agreed.
That's a great point, Gene, and that point makes me think about this, because this is who we are. And I'm going to talk about that, Gene, and that's one of my points in the next session, Gene, so I love that. We have to be very convicted over our values, because let's be honest, people are looking at churches to see if it gives them the preference they want. And I'm not all about providing people with preferences. I'm about providing people with the truth, with conviction. Because here, people are looking for preferences, but what they really want is truth and something foundational for their lives, their marriage, and their family. So whatever the website looks like, whatever we communicate, and I got one more thought on that in just about 10 seconds, we've got to be passionate about it. Listen, I don't like alligators. I don't like snakes. I don't like the woods. I don't like mosquitoes. I don't like any of that. And I've never been in a camping trip with my kids. That's terrible. I don't like being outside. I won't even do it in my backyard. But you know what show I have taped all the recordings? Crocodile hunter. You know why? Because he's passionate about it. I love watching. He's an idiot, but he's passionate about it. And I loved him when he was still alive. He was so passionate. I was just drawn to it because he was convicted by it. He was passionate about it. I don't always agree with him on everything, but my point is I loved watching him because he really, 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 really believed in what he was doing. And people may not like your preferences or maybe our values, but if we really believe in what we're doing, that's what they want. They find that. And then one other thought on that. How many websites have you been to, or blogs or whatever, where it's posted on their website with the pastor or whoever, and you're like, I want to get a feel for this guy. I want to get a feel for these people. And you click on it, and it's from like 3 years ago or from 6 months ago. And there's nothing wrong with that, but people want to know, what are you doing right now? What did you speak on last week? What did you say on Tuesday about the current national state of things, the virus? How's your family doing? Are your kids nuts? You know, there's something about them clicking on your website, and there's something that you recorded a day or two ago, and it's just a minute and a half word on, here's my family, here's what we're doing. Sunday was great. This coming Sunday, here's what we're going to be doing. It's current, and people want to know, what does that look like and feel like? So now let's just say this too, and now 10 more seconds and I'm done. That's not easy to do because you've got to stay on top of that. I mean, because that's almost another ministry as a whole, So anyway, we'll get to all that, but these are really good comments you guys are making.
Let the web guy come in for a second, because I can hear the expectations getting very high, and I don't want to disappoint. I look at what web designers do, what the webmasters do, as being like the guy who's responsible for the display window at the department store.
Correct.
Right. It's up to the people in the store as to what they put in the display window.
Sure.
One of the greatest compliments that you'll ever get for your website is when somebody visits and after the service they say, it's just like it was on the website. I've had that happen here in Hawaii, and because they'll go and they'll check it out. They want to find out how you preach, how you conduct yourselves. And when they show up and it's not a bait and switch, and Matt, to your point, it's not from 2003. Parentheses here, in my real estate world, I've discovered that real estate agents are liars from the get-go. They do put up pictures from their high school. They take great pictures of slums. It's about marketing, right? Churches need to market without being marketers.
Right.
We need to be truth in advertising. And so my encouragement to you guys as we get into this is I'm going to give you a beautiful display window. What are you going to put in it? And one of the big challenges is avoid being aspirational. We had this conversation years ago at Faith when we were talking about what our goals and mission were going to be. And what you find too often is, number one, you want to fill up space. And so you keep coming up with ideas, but when you kind of back up and look at it, you realize that only 3 of the 7 things actually reflect who you are today. And churches want to be able to give this great picture, but they're lying. It's not what they are. It's what they want to be, maybe one day. And related to that is, I think the thing is, a church can't bite off more than it can chew. And I've unfortunately learned this the hard way. If you're going to put a pastor's blog on a website, pastor's got her blog. If you're not going to blog. And the last thing that was on there was the week that your kid was born, but your kid is in 3rd grade now. That ain't going to hit it, right? So Matt, to your point, you need current content, because you can draw people in with a flashy website and run them off with old stuff really quick. And so, it's amazing how you can really put a great face on your church. And it cannot be that, or you can have a really shabby face on your church, and it's a much more vibrant church if people came. So, truth in advertising.
I love it, love it, love it. And one thing you said there is so powerful to me. All of it was awesome. but the idea of being real and authentic, I mean, that needs to be eventually one of our values, because sometimes we present ourselves on our best day. Most people, when they do an Instagram picture, that picture is one of about 20 that they tried of that same scenario, and they find the best one to post it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I don't want a picture of you when you got out of the bed. Comb your hair, brush your teeth, do that one. So I'm for that. But I think people respond to something that's current and something that's real. I got 5 kids. We always got issues. Pretty much every day. So I think people knowing, here's where we are, and being real about it is a really important value to be communicated in, whether it be a blog or a video, whatever it would be, because if we're being honest, that's and people will relate to who we are more than they relate to where we're going in regards to like where we want to be one day. That's a great point.
Do you know who really does this very, very, very well? Campus pastor of Water's Edge in Yorktown, Virginia. A young fellow you guys may remember, his name is Ben Carr. He is engaged in the internet. He is constantly putting things out there. If you go to his website, it's current. There are no cobwebs in the display window. It's just, he's really vibrant. Of course, Ben's vibrant anyway, but he is so up to date in what he puts out there, so that you know what he did last weekend. You know what he did this past week. You're able to track this guy and say, okay, this guy is out there for everybody to see, and we need to. This is putting pressure on you, Matt. Your whole comment about being able to go to a website and see the pastor saying, here's what we're going to be talking about this next week, and showing your enthusiasm, and here's where we're headed, and being able to have that out there with regularity. Blogs, you know what? I don't care about blogs personally. I don't want to, and I don't know that most people do, but they do want to see a current, like Ben does, a current video saying, here's what's happening. You need to be there, be square.
Gene, you broke up there at the very end, but I got what you said and I loved it. And I think there's some truth I think there's a place for a blog, but nowadays in our generations, people want video. I want to see it. I don't want to have to really think about it. Make it quick too. I don't need a 5-minute video, because the minute I click on it, it says 5 minutes and 92 seconds, which that's not going to be correct, because that'd be 6 minutes and something else. But the minute they see that, they're not watching that. They're just not watching that. And so there's a lot of truth to that. And I love the way this conversation is trending.
So we're at the end of our time together, and I appreciate, the cool thing about the content here is I thought that it would take us X amount of time to get it done, but because of your interaction and our debating this and talking about this and how it ultimately leads to study to show yourself approved. Just get out there and do it diligently. It's taken us through some understanding about certainly what we expect when we go to visit and we partner with other folks potentially. The first question we're going to come back with next week is, what do we need to know / understand about our own worship group? And I want you to be prepared to talk about that, because here's the thing. If you don't know what it is we're about, then when you go other places, you don't necessarily know what to anticipate. It may all be good to you if you don't know your own meat and potatoes. And so that's kind of where we're going to start in next week, to talk about those things that are key about us knowing our own stuff before we go and have judgment calls about what's happening elsewhere. So we'll pray in a couple seconds. Last call for comments. Contributions. Thank you so far, guys. This is a wonderfully vibrant discussion. And I'll tell you, the thing that I like about what our Sunday school is this is how I think it should be. And this is maybe very different from a lot of other Sunday schools. You know how when you have a really, really, really good friend and you don't see each other for a couple of years, but when you do see each other, you continue on like it was just yesterday? See, we should be able to have a dialogue that's ongoing and it's never ending, and it feels like it's okay to just start right up again, and it doesn't have to be this curt beginning and end, because that's what the lesson says it's supposed to be. It becomes more organic and more applicable as long as the conversation application makes sense to our lives and kingdom business. And that's what I appreciate about our ongoing dialogue in the mornings before we have our celebration time. Going once out there. Brother Bruce, you got something for us?
Preston, let me just say this and give me 10 seconds. As we talk out loud about these things, you learn. There's something about saying them and talking about them, and whether it's website or keeping up to date on current, or whether it's what the analogy that Bruce used about, I can give you the window, but you got to fill it up. We're learning. This is huge. We're laying foundational stuff, and I love what you just said about this time being a time where you just kind of come together and we learn.
Okay. So we're going to pray. I'm going to thank you all for your participation. I can tell you because, like Matt said, I may prepare the lesson, but I do a lot of learning through this, and it's learning as to maybe what we need next. It's our next discussion point. But I think the thing I appreciate most is learning where I can depend, and that's a people thing. I know through our discussions and through our joining in the morning what I can depend on from Sarah. I know what I can depend on from Jerry. I know kind of what I can depend on from Gene. And that's through this kind of interaction, because there's a learning that happens where what Matt says is correct. Sometimes when you say things aloud, it makes it more reality oriented, and then folks kind of know what's coming out of your heart, because that's kind of what comes out of your mouth. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't tell falsehoods, but it does mean that if you say it, it becomes more reality than just if it's in your head and nobody knows it. And that's what our time and our exchanges on Sunday before a celebration, that's kind of what it's about, to expose us to each other so that we can better go about linking arms doing kingdom business.